Rhaegar Targaryen had seen much in his life, but when he watched his father burn yet another man alive in the dragon pit, something inside him broke for good. Aerys was no longer a king. He was a monster hiding behind a crown, a madman obsessed with fire and death. That night, Rhaegar made a decision that would change the course of Westeros forever. He summoned his most loyal allies, Sir Arthur Dayne, Sir Barristan Selmy, and Lord Jon Connington. They met in a secret chamber beneath the Red Keep. Rhaegar's voice was calm, but his words carried the weight of steel. "My father has turned this realm into a nightmare. If we do not stop him now, there will be nothing left to rule." Sir Arthur had always seen greatness in Rhaegar, but that night he saw something more: resolve, ruthless clarity. He was no longer just a prince, he was a king in waiting. They planned quickly and quietly. There would be no trial, no mercy. Aerys would be removed before he could burn the city, before he could destroy any more lives. The next morning, Rhaegar walked into the throne room with Sir Arthur and Sir Barristan at his side. The Mad King was seated on the Iron Throne, whispering to himself about wildfire. When he saw his son, he sneered. "How dare you enter unannounced? Boy, have you come to beg forgiveness again?" Rhaegar said nothing. He stepped forward, his silver hair shining under the torchlight, his violet eyes cold and unreadable. The Mad King recognized the look. He had once worn it himself. Before Aerys could scream, Sir Arthur drew his sword. It was quick. A moment later, the Mad King was dead. King's Landing was stunned. The nobles whispered of treason, of betrayal, but many common folk rejoiced quietly. Rhaegar Targaryen was crowned king by the High Septon within the week. He named Elia Martell his queen, and their children, Rhaenys and baby Aegon, were declared heirs to the Iron Throne. A new dawn seemed to rise over Westeros. The capital was calmer, the executions stopped, and for the first time in years, the ooi, smell of burnt flesh, no longer filled the air. Rhaegar opened the gates to the poor, ordered fairer laws, and began repairing the city's broken walls, both physical and moral. But peace never comes without a price. Far in the north, Lord Rickard Stark was furious. His eldest son, Brandon, had gone to King's Landing to confront Rhaegar over the disappearance of Lyanna Stark, his beloved sister, who had vanished months ago. With Aerys dead, Brandon was still being held under guard in the city. Rickard sent a raven, "Return my daughter and my son, or the North will march." What the world didn't know was that Lyanna wasn't kidnapped. She was hidden away willingly with Rhaegar, in a secret tower in Dorne, and she was pregnant with his child. Rhaegar had convinced himself he could hold both truths at once: rule Westeros as a just king, stay loyal to Elia and his children, and still love Lyanna in secret. But such balance is fragile, and secrets are never safe in a kingdom full of spies. Elia noticed the change in him. She watched her husband retreat into silence, into long rides alone, into letters he would burn before she could see them. She asked questions. She got no answers. And so she asked Barristan Selmy, quietly, politely, to find the truth. When Elia learned of Lyanna and the baby, and the secret marriage done in the Dorne Hills by a quiet Septon, her world collapsed. "You lied to me," she whispered. "You lied to your queen, to your children, to your realm." Rhaegar said nothing, because what could he say? The realm believed it had found peace, but war was brewing again, this time not just on the battlefield but in the hearts of the people closest to the king. The raven arrived at Winterfell before dawn. Lord Rickard Stark read the letter 3 times, his face pale and unmoving. Then he handed it to his second son, Eddard. The words were clear. King Rhaegar refuses to release Brandon, and Lyanna remains in Dorne. He claims she is safe and under his protection. Rickard's fists clenched. Protection? It sounded like a cage built from silk and lies. Brandon was not only Rickard's heir, he was the North's future. And Lyanna? She was the fire of House Stark, the wild heart that couldn't be tamed. She would never willingly vanish unless something powerful held her there. Rhaegar's claim that she was safe burned like poison in Rickard's throat. "Prepare the banners," Rickard ordered. "The North rides south." Eddard said nothing, but he didn't agree. Somewhere deep down, he knew his sister loved Rhaegar, or at least believed she did. She had never spoken of Brandon with the same urgency that she did about dreams, or music, or secret places far from the weight of duty. And Rhaegar, the melancholy prince who sang in Harrenhal, he wasn't just a villain in some tale, but loyalty. Didn't bend for love. Ned would follow his father. That was the Stark way. Meanwhile, in King's Landing, Queen Alia sat on her chamber's balcony, staring at the clouds drifting over Blackwater Bay. Rhaegar hadn't spoken to her since she confronted him about Lyanna. He avoided her eyes, avoided her touch, avoided their children. Rhaenys had begun asking why her father no longer told her stories at night. Alia wanted to scream. She had married Rhaegar with dreams of peace between Dorne and the crown. She had, borne his children, stood beside him through his father's madness, and even forgiven his quiet sadness. But betrayal was different. Betrayal buried love. And yet, what choice did she have? She couldn't go back to Dorne, not without shame, and she couldn't go forward, not without becoming something colder than she wanted to be. Her mother had warned her once, "The crown may look golden, but it tastes like ash." South of the capital in the Tower of Joy, Lyanna Stark stood barefoot in a quiet room, her belly round with child. Rhaegar visited her in secret every fortnight. He came with sweet words, poetry, and a promise. "One day I'll unite the realm and you'll walk through the Red Keep beside me." But that day never came, and Lyanna had begun to realize it never would. The tower was not a prison, but it felt like one. The guards, Arthur Dane among them, treated her with kindness and respect, but they wouldn't let her leave. Not even to send a raven to her brother. "It's for your safety," Rhaegar had told her. But safety from what? From Elia? From the truth? She often sat by the window and cried, her hand on her stomach, whispering, "Jon, if it's a boy, I'll name you Jon, simple and strong." Back in the capital, the political winds were shifting. Tywin Lannister had remained quiet during Aerys's fall. But now, with the North marching and Dorne enraged, he saw opportunity. Cersei, his daughter, stood before him one evening, her golden hair catching the candlelight. "Rhaegar is weak," Tywin said, "too emotional, too broken, and now he's at war with half the realm. What happens when he falls?" Cersei smiled. "Then we rise." In the Reach, the Tyrells debated which side to support. In Dorne, the Martells burned with humiliation. Elia's brother, Prince Oberyn, sharpened his spear in silence. He had always mistrusted Rhaegar's honor. Now he had proof that honor meant nothing. As armies moved and alliances wavered, King Rhaegar sat in his solar alone. His dreams of peace, of a prophecy where the dragon has 3 heads, began to shatter under the weight of real war. He still believed his son with Lyanna would be the prince who was promised, the savior of the realm. But how could he save anything when he couldn't even keep his own family together? The storm was coming, and this time there was no mad king to blame. There was only Rhaegar. Snow fell in the north as the banners of House Stark, House Umber, and House Karstark rode together across the neck. Lord Rickard Stark led them with iron resolve. This was not the march of rebels, he told himself. This was justice. His daughter was stolen. His son was imprisoned. The so-called king had chosen lies over honor, but not everyone saw it that way. Eddard Stark, quiet and dutiful, rode beside his father, but kept his thoughts to himself. He remembered Lyanna's laughter, her reckless spirit. She was not a damsel who needed saving. She was a wolf who chased the wind. And still, part of him feared she was not in chains, but in love. They reached Harrenhal in less than a month. The old blackened ruin still stank of ash, a fitting place for parley. Rhaegar had sent Lord John Connington to speak on his behalf. "He wants no war," Connington said, "only peace. He offers Brandon's release, gold, and trade privileges." "To the north?" Rickard narrowed his eyes. "Where is my daughter?" Connington hesitated. "She is safe." "Where is she?" Rickard growled. "She has chosen her place. The king would speak with her personally before returning her if she agrees." Rickard slammed his gauntleted hand on the table. "There will be no if. There will be no bargain. Rhaegar will return my children or we take them." The North broke the truce that night. Brandon was moved from the Red Keep to Storm's End, but the North's scouts were already watching every path. Skirmishes erupted along the Blackwater. Targaryen loyalists tried to hold the crossings, but the northern charge was relentless. They weren't here for land. They were here for blood. In Dorne, news of the war reigniting spread quickly. Prince Doran Martell kept a measured face, but Prince Oberyn did not. Elia had sent no word since the truth broke. Rhaegar's betrayal had become a whisper in every tavern, every noble court. And Oberyn had never been good at ignoring whispers. "Send me," he told Doran. "Let me remind the realm what Martell's steel feels like." "You'll only add fire to fire," Doran warned. "Then let it burn." Meanwhile, in King's Landing, Rhaegar tried to hold the kingdom together, but cracks ran in every direction. Elia had moved to her own quarters. Their children no longer asked for him. The court split in half, those who pitied the king's conflict and those who blamed him for creating it. Lord Varys whispered that war was inevitable. "Your Grace, I suggest sending Lady Lyanna to Winterfell. As a gesture, it may calm the storm." Rhaegar stared out the window. "And what of my child? Should I give him up too?" Varys bowed. "That child may bring the realm peace, or more war than we can survive." At the Tower of Joy, Lyanna went into labor. It was not a quiet birth. The screams echoed across the stone walls. Blood stained the bed, the floor, her hands. Sir Arthur Dayne held her hand through it, whispering that she was strong, that her brother would be proud. The child came as the sun rose, a boy, pale as snow with a tuft of black hair. "John," she whispered. "His name is John." But Lyanna was fading. Her breaths became ragged. Her skin turned cold. Arthur called for help, but it was too late. The blood would not stop. Her last words, "Promise me, Arthur. Don't let them take him. Promise me." By the time Rhaegar arrived, Lyanna was already gone. He held her body in silence, his face stone, his fingers trembling as they brushed her hair. The child cried in a cradle nearby. He didn't cry with it. For hours Rhaegar sat in that tower, the boy in his arms, the woman he loved lying still beside him. He named the child Aegon, not John. He told himself it was destiny, that the boy would unite the realm, that the prophecy still lived, but deep down he knew he had already lost everything. The boy was brought to King's Landing under the highest secrecy. Only 3 men knew of his true parentage, Rhaegar, Sir Arthur Dayne, and Lord Varys. The rest of the realm was told that Queen Elia had given birth to a second son, Aegon Targaryen. A beautiful lie, wrapped in silk and sealed with royal ink. Elia said nothing. When the child was placed in her arms, she did not smile. She did not ask whose child he truly was. She only nodded like someone drowning in a sea too deep to swim. She held him like a duty, not like a mother. But behind closed doors, Elia Martell began to change. She no longer asked to see Rhaegar. She no longer spoke of peace with Dorne. She spent her days watching her children, Rhaenys and this new Aegon, learning their habits, studying their mannerisms like a maester studies scrolls. Something hardened in her eyes. She'd once been soft, forgiving. Now there was cold fire in her blood. Across the realm, whispers spread like rot. The North had declared war. House Baratheon, long suspicious of the Targaryens, declared for the Starks. Robert Baratheon, tall and thunderous, had finally learned the truth, or at least his version of it. Rhaegar stole Lyanna, then let her die in some tower while he sat his ass on a throne. I'll kill him myself. Eddard Stark, grieving and weary, arrived at Storm's End to find Robert readying for battle. Ned had begged his father not to push for war. He had even hoped in some small place of his heart that Lyanna would return on her own. But now she was dead, and Ned blamed one man for all of it. Rhaegar has no honor, Ned told Robert, and no soul. Together they marched. Meanwhile, in the capital, Rhaegar clung to power with bleeding hands. The lords of Westeros were choosing sides. The Vale remained neutral. Lord Jon Arryn refused to join what he called a war of ghosts and grudges. The Rivellans under Lord Hoster Tully hesitated, but leaned north. Tywin Lannister, ever the lion waiting in tall grass, watched everything and said nothing. But his silence was more dangerous than a sword. Rhaegar turned to his last loyal ally, Lord John Connington, and made a decision that would define the war: raise the royal army, march for the Trident. We meet the North and Baratheons before they reach the capital. Sir Arthur Dane, despite his grief, agreed to lead the King's Guard with Rhaegar. But before he left, Rhaegar gave him a final command. Take the boy, hide him, raise him far from court, under another name. If I fall, he must live. Arthur hesitated. You said he was the prince who was promised. He is. But prophecy means nothing if he dies in a cradle of politics and knives. Take him to the mountains, let him be no one. And so, Aegon, born John, was taken by the sword of the morning and vanished into obscurity. The world believed the queen had lost the child to fever. A quiet funeral was held, a closed casket. Even Elia didn't attend. At the Trident, the armies gathered. It was the largest battle Westeros had seen in a century. The banners of Stark, Baratheon and Tully faced off against the dragons of House Targaryen, and in the heart of it stood Rhaegar, clad in black armor with rubies shining across his chest. He looked not like a prince of peace, but a warrior forged by loss. Robert Baratheon charged him with a warhammer in hand, bellowing Lyanna's name like a battle cry. Their duel lasted nearly an hour. Sword against hammer, fire against fury. When Robert's hammer finally shattered the rubies from Rhaegar's armor and crushed his chest in a single blow, the river turned red. The prince who wanted to save the realm died beneath the water, and the war was not over. The Trident had turned to a graveyard of men and banners. Rhaegar's body was never recovered, only his crushed armor and the scattered rubies that washed downstream like blood-red tears. Word spread like wildfire across the realm. The prince is dead. The realm is broken. Robert Baratheon stood over the battlefield, soaked in blood and breathless, his warhammer still dripping. Victory should have tasted sweet, but it didn't. Lyanna was gone, Rhaegar was gone, and the cost had only begun to show. The North rejoiced with vengeance, not joy. Rickard Stark raised his sword to the sky, believing justice had finally been served. But Eddard Stark watched the Trident's waters turn red and felt only cold emptiness. His sister was dead, his friend was dead, and a kingdom was now in ruin. Back in King's Landing, Queen Alia sat on the Iron Throne, not officially, not crowned, but every eye in the Red Keep had turned to her. Her husband was gone, her son Aegon had died, and the court was leaderless. Yet she sat tall, calm, regal, in mourning black, and for the first time, her voice cut through the silence like a blade. "We will not yield," she declared to the small council. "This throne belongs to my son, Rhaenys, by law, by blood. If they come for her, they come for fire. Lord." Varys bowed low, though even he had to hide his surprise. "As your grace commands." The Martells, hearing of Rhaegar's death, finally declared open war. Prince Doran sent word that Dornish spears would rise for House Targaryen and for Elia. Oberyn had already ridden for King's Landing with 2,000 warriors, but Elia had no illusions. The North and Stormlands were coming. Robert would not stop with one dead prince. He wanted the dynasty itself to fall. He wanted a crown. And Tywin Lannister, he still watched from the shadows. It was then, in this moment of chaos, that Tywin made his move. He marched westward with 40,000 men, claiming to be loyal to the crown. "House Lannister offers peace and support to Queen Elia," his ravens read. "Let us help restore order to the realm." Elia's advisers urged caution. Sir Barristan Selmy himself begged her. "Do not open the gates. Lord Tywin has no love for your family." But Elia, desperate for stability, gave the order. The Lannisters entered the capital, and by nightfall the screams began. Sir Gregor Clegane, "The mountain," stormed the Red Keep with brutal force. Sir Amory Lorch followed. They claimed they were rooting out traitors, but in truth it was a purge. Barristan fought to protect Elia, but even the finest knight cannot be everywhere at once. Elia was dragged from her chambers. She begged for her children, begged for mercy. She received none. Rhaenys was butchered in her bed. Elia was raped, then murdered with her skull crushed against the wall. And her body was left on the marble floor like nothing more than a warning. When Robert Baratheon arrived 3 days later, the throne room still stank of death. Tywin greeted him with a smile and 2 wrapped bodies at his feet. "The war is won," he said. "The Targaryens are finished." Robert looked at the corpses. His face didn't change. "Good," he muttered. "Then burn the rest." But Ned Stark was not silent. He looked at Elia's broken body, at the child's bloodied sheets, and his voice shook with disgust. "This is no victory," he told Robert. "This is murder. This is treason." Robert didn't care. He had his crown now, and he would never forgive Rhaegar or the Targaryen name. He made it law. Any Targaryen who lives will die. No more dragons. But one dragon still lived. Far away, in the mountains of Dorne, Sir Arthur, Dane held a crying infant in his arms. The child had no crown, no castle, and no name in the world, but his eyes were the deep violet of old Valyria. His blood was royal. His name was still Aegon, and he would one day return. Years passed. The name Targaryen became a whisper, spoken in fear or in hatred, or in deep quiet longing by those who still believed in the old blood. Robert Baratheon sat on the Iron Throne, a king by conquest, not by legacy. The throne cut him. More often than it welcomed him, he drank too much, slept too little, and laughed too loudly to hide the fact that peace never truly came. The realm had been stitched together with corpses and lies. Ned Stark had returned to Winterfell, colder and quieter than he had ever been. He kept his silence about Elia's murder, but the memory festered in him like a wound that never healed. His friendship with Robert was never the same. Duty bound them, but trust had died on the steps of the Red Keep. In the south, in the shadow of the Red Mountains, Sir Arthur Dane lived in exile. He raised the boy in a small hidden village under the name Jon Stone, a bastard name to protect him. The villagers believed Arthur was a sellsword-turned farmer, and Jon was his sister's orphaned son. No one asked questions. No one dared, but Arthur trained him, not with the cruelty of a soldier, but with the quiet urgency of a man who knew the boy's life depended on knowing how to survive. Jon learned the blade before he learned to read. He hunted in silence, spoke, with precision, and never asked about his parents until the day he turned 13. They were sitting by the fire when Jon finally asked, "Who was my mother?" Arthur hesitated, then said only, "A Stark. She died to protect you." Jon didn't ask again, but something in him shifted. A shadow passed over his innocence. He began to look at the stars longer, to question the silence around him. He knew there was more, and there was. In King's Landing, Varys never stopped watching. He had spies in every brothel, every port, every court, and he knew the truth. One Targaryen child had survived, but he said nothing. Not yet. In Dorne, the Martells mourned, but they also planned. Oberyn, furious and bitter, whispered in dark corners about vengeance. His nieces, the Sand Snakes, grew up learning poison and steel, their hearts set on fire by stories of their Aunt Elia. Across the narrow sea, Viserys and Daenerys Targaryen, the children of the Mad King's late reign, were also in hiding. But they were not the last hope. Not anymore. The last hope was Jon. Years later, as Jon grew into a young man, tall, quiet, with the silver-gold hair of his father and the icy reserve of his mother, the world began to turn again. Robert grew fat, careless. Whispers of rebellion echoed in foreign lands. The dragons were still dead, but not forgotten. One night Arthur fell ill. He knew his time was ending. As Jon sat beside him, Arthur took his hand and told him the truth. "Your name is not Stone." "You are not no one." Jon's face tensed, but he didn't speak. "You are Aegon Targaryen, the true-born son of Rhaegar and Lyanna, the last dragon. And one day this realm will need you." Jon stared into the fire. The flames danced like the past itself, wild, broken, impossible to hold. "I don't want a crown," he said quietly. Arthur smiled faintly. That's why you may deserve one." When the old knight died, Jon buried him beneath the weirwood tree, sword in hand, and then he vanished. No one saw where he went. Some say he sailed east, others say he headed north to the Wall, but a few still whisper, in the quiet corners, of brothels and wine-stained taverns, that the dragon has not died, only slept, and one day the boy who was never meant to be king will return to take back the throne his father died for.